Thank you everyone for being here today. And what we're going to talk about is quantum ready FinClouds. My name is Mehak Kalsi. Easy way to remember that is what the heck Mehak. And what I want to talk about today is the security, resilience, and the post-quantum future of the global financial infrastructure. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. There's a little bit of background for you so you can get to know me. I am a recognized leader in cybersecurity and quantum computing, also in the risk space as well. I'm a co-chair here at the Cloud Security Alliance of the Quantum Safe Security Working Group and a CSA Research Fellow. I've been featured twice by Authority Magazine as a leader in quantum computing. I have a couple of certifications you can see up there from Stanford, MIT, and Harvard in cybersecurity, quantum computing, and artificial intelligence. I have a heavy and a strong background in working with Fortune 500 companies. I've worked in defense, in consulting, and now I work in financial services. I do a lot of different speaking engagements, including here at the CSA as well as other organizations, and have a couple of credentials you can see there as well. Today we have a lot to cover in a short amount of time, so I'm going to try to get through as much as we possibly can because this is really important for those of you who work in financial services. So the goal of today is to make sure I can explain to you why quantum resiliency is so important, but also give you a background of quantum computing and why it's so important for the financial services industry. So we'll start with some market insights, what's going on in the quantum world, a high-level review then after that of quantum computing so that you're familiar with some of the terms you might come across. Then what the problem is, what are the issues that you'll face with quantum computing and what you need to prepare for, as well as some of the risks, and then things you can start doing immediately at your organizations, and then a brief closing. So let's dive right in. Before I show you the market insights, I just want to set the stage with quantum computing and how it will change everything. Okay, so anyone who reaches quantum supremacy, or in this case quantum advantage first, will be the de facto leader of the world. So what is a quantum advantage? Let's just define that. Let's start with that. So quantum advantage is when a quantum computer will show an advantage or be able to solve a problem that a classical computer cannot. And what is a classical computer? Let's define that. Classical computer is anything you have on your desk today as you're watching this presentation. So your laptop, your computer, your tablet, your phone, even supercomputers are classical computers. So in this presentation, moving forward, when you hear me talking about classical computers, that's what I'm talking about. And then everything else is quantum computers. And we'll talk a little bit more about what differentiates them as we move forward and go through the overview with quantum computing. So what's really important to note here is that whoever reaches this quantum supremacy, quantum advantage first will be that de facto leader, and then there will be a brain drain to those quantum hubs, wherever that may be, in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, wherever we see this advantage occur, that's where everyone who's working in quantum will go to, right? And so from a financial perspective, from a country supremacy perspective, you'll want that to be whatever country you're in to have that advantage. And then you'll have a strategic edge in critical industries. Again, the smartest people will be in those countries or in those areas. They're gonna have a critical strategic edge in critical industries like finance, like energy, like anything that basically impacts a country and their well-being, and finances topmost of that. They're going to have that critical edge. So make sure, you want to make sure that wherever you are, that's where the advantage is coming in. So some market insights. Now, I caveat this with there are a lot of organizations that are creating quantum chips. Okay, right here you're seeing IBM. They have a couple of new ones they've come out with, so I wanted to highlight them. But in reality, what I want you to focus on is what they're trying to address. They're trying to address fault tolerance and error correction. Now, these are two other quantum terms I wanted to make you familiar with because they're really, really big in the quantum space in terms of what will get us to that quantum advantage, So basically making sure that any errors that come up, we're able to fix them quickly, and then also make sure those qubits don't decohere. And we'll talk about that a little later. So I wanted to point out these chips in particular because you're going to be asked at your organizations that, okay, I understand there's a threat with quantum computing, but I want to understand how I can use it for my business as well. How in the financial industry I can actually utilize quantum computing. So Quantum chips is one of those ways. Again, it's not just IBM in the market. There's D-Wave, there's IonQ, there's Quantinuum. There's a lot of different organizations making quantum chips. This is just some of them. And we'll walk into these as well, because again, more quantum chip players. You've probably heard of some of these. You have the Google Willow, that it was end of 2024 when they really came out into the market. You have your Microsofts and your Amazons in the game as well. What's really interesting about them is they're all doing it a different way. If you look at qubit type on that list, it says superconducting, topological, and CAT. What's interesting there is, let's see who wins the game. Like, which type of qubit type is actually going to come out front with that quantum advantage. But again, what I want you to focus on here is noise and error correction. Those are two other quantum terms. You've already heard error correction on the previous slide. These are really important things that need to be addressed in the quantum computing industry before we can see that quantum advantage. So keep those in mind and look at those use cases at the bottom, right? If you look at the bottom, really any of these can be used for the financial industry. Any of these quantum chips, whoever comes out first, I'm sure they will be wanting to be utilized by your industry. But if you look, it's Google's Willow and Amazon Ocelot that really call out finance specifically. So keep that in mind. If you're looking to build quantum use cases at your organization, you know, why you should invest in quantum computing, well, start looking at these different players. Like maybe these are the quantum chips that you may want to utilize at your organization. So that's the good news. This is the good side. Now let's move forward and talk a little bit about quantum computing at a high level and what it really is. So as I mentioned before, quantum computing is different from classical computing. It's not just a smaller and faster version of today's computers. It is actually a whole different way of computing. So again, we have our classical computers, everything from supercomputers to what's on your desk at this time, and then quantum computers. And in reality, when we're going to see this quantum advantage that we're talking about, it's going to be a hybrid model. It's how quantum computers work today too, okay? I mean, you have your quantum computers that are doing the calculations, but then the solutions are being stored on a classical computer. Why? That's mostly just because cost savings, honestly. And so really, we will see a quantum advantage come to fruition in this hybrid model. Classical and quantum working together. And we've already talked about the industries they'll be able to help, so we'll move forward. Now, this table is really important. I created this because I think it's a really good way to showcase the difference between classical computing and quantum computing at the most basic level and why they are so different. So I want to draw your attention to a couple of lines here, a couple of rows. The first one being the most basic one about why classical and quantum computers are different. Classical computing, they use bits to store information. And how is that information stored? Zeros and ones. That's it. Quantum computing uses qubits. Now, that can be stored, the information, as zeros, ones, or anything in between. And there's another quantum term for you up there, superposition. Anything in parentheses you're seeing that's bolded out, that's a quantum term I want you to be familiar with. We won't go into details of it, but you might hear it in your quantum journey. So I wanted to have that for you. Now, that is the most basic reason a classical computer and quantum computer are different. What types of bits they run on. Classical bits versus qubits. So keep that in mind. Then their processing power is very different too. Classical computers run one computation at a time. Quantum computers run them in parallel. So that is due to entanglement. Again, qubits being entangled together, they are able to run multiple calculations. Now, to be fair, you could do this with a classical computer, serial processing, run a bunch of computers together. It's not the same. It's going to cost so much more money. It's really not the way a quantum computer works, and you're not going to get the same results as a quantum computer would give you. Now, the other most important thing is at the bottom there, Shor's algorithm. Now, we're going to talk about this on the next slide, but Shor's algorithm was created by Peter Shor in the 1990s, and basically it can take public key encryption or asymmetric encryption and break it down into the prime numbers that created that key. And that is a huge deal. This algorithm has existed since the 90s, and what the theory is that when it runs on a quantum computer, it will be able to break that encryption that we're talking about. To be fair, you can also run Shor's algorithm on a classical computer. It just takes such a long time though, and the number of resources you would have to use and the number of years it would take to break that algorithm is just unreasonable. So a quantum computer though, theoretically, will be able to run Shor's algorithm. So here it is on your screen. If you look on your right, you're going to see Shor's algorithm. That is quantum code that's being run, and that's how you'd run the algorithm. And as mentioned, where this becomes a problem at organizations, especially financial institutions, but really anywhere, is data security. You know, what do you use for your encryption at your organization? More than likely, your answer is public key encryption, because 90% of organizations secure their data that way. All data on the internet is secured by public key encryption as well. So in reality, everyone should be worried about this. And currently, PKE, public key encryption, is considered uncrackable, right? You know, you have these long key pairs, 2048 bits, but in reality, a quantum computer is theorized to be able to break something twice as long in a few hours. Now, initially, when we see a quantum advantage, it might take a week or so or something like that. But very quickly, we will get to the point of being able to break that encryption in a few hours, as compared to running it on, you know, Shor's algorithm on a classical computer, which would take years and years and decades to break. That's the computational power we're talking about. So that's why data security at your organizations, at financial institutions, is so extremely important. That's where all our money is, right? As a country, as a people, that's where all our money is. So what's interesting here, though, I do want to note, is that there are some who believe that maybe we will never see a quantum advantage. I put this forward as a note that the encryption that we had in the 80s and 90s, that was considered defense level. Is that any good today? Right? Imagine if we had thought of that back then and said, hey, it's good enough, we don't need to do any better. Well, we'd be in a lot of trouble right now. So really, PQC, post-quantum cryptography, should be seen as a gold standard moving forward. Whether we believe in having a quantum advantage or not, that is what you should all be working towards, what all organizations should be working towards. So here's some of the risks. Now, this is the biggest risk that is talked about today. Harvest now, decrypt later, HNDL. Now, this is a huge risk for all organizations. It depends on the type of data you have. It really puts into perspective how long it'll take you to migrate over to the cryptography that you need. But from a big picture perspective, Harvest now, decrypt later is a huge deal for those who work in defense, government, diplomacy, where long-term confidentiality is extremely important. But it still matters at your organization, because basically this is the store now, decrypt later. Basically what that means is a hacker comes in, takes your data now, stores it, and then in the future they decrypt it when the technology catches up. So depending on when that happens, this data may already be so old it's no longer valuable to the hackers, but the chances of that are kind of low. So it is really important to start making sure you're encrypting your data the correct way now rather than in the future, and you start securing it so that those hackers can't just sit on that data and hit you later, basically. Now, this is one that's not talked about as often, but is extremely, extremely important. So it's called trust now, forge later, or otherwise known as sign now, forge later. So think about it. Digital signatures and certificates are used on the internet to authenticate people and systems and say, hey, yeah, I trust this digital certificate coming in. This is from Microsoft. Microsoft wants to, download some software onto my computer. And I trust them. Your computer is going to trust them and say, yes, go ahead, download this on there. Now, what can actually happen moving forward with a quantum computer and breaking those encryption standards and everything like that is that your computer trusts Microsoft, but a malicious party could forge that signature tomorrow, and you would believe it was coming from Microsoft, but in reality, it's a malicious party, and you would download malicious code or something else onto your computer. Now, imagine that at an enterprise level, what you would do at a financial institution. Now, that is something that we really need to consider, is how do we keep that authentication that we utilize and that trust we have to make these updates that are really important to our systems, how do we make sure we can trust each other doing that moving forward? So what can you do? We'll talk about it on the next slide, but to give you a preview, there are NIST finalized quantum resistant signature algorithms. You can look at those. It's NIST FIPS 203, 204, and 205. And then you have an inventory where you can create, digital signatures and certificates so that at your organization that you utilize, that you can start figuring out where you need to make those changes. And then you have to build in crypto agility at your organization, basically the ability to move cryptography in and out or change it as required quickly. This is not an easy effort. It takes a lot of time. And then risk mitigation in general. How does it manage at your organization and making sure that it can handle something like this very, very quickly? So next steps, what can you do immediately? Now, we went through a lot of information at a very high level, but detailed enough. So the biggest thing you can do is start a team at your organization that starts looking at your post-quantum journey and creates a post-quantum plan. And CISA, NIST, and the NSA put something out a couple of years ago, and you'll see them at the bottom there, that gave you like a 3-page plan that you could do of looking at, what you have within your network, talking to your vendors, talking to your suppliers about them having a post-quantum plan and what you would do, start really getting started on it. Since then, NIST has built upon that. And I wrote an article about this back in August of 2024 when it came out, NIST FIPS 203, 204, and 205. Basically, they put out 3 final contenders for post-quantum cryptography that your organization can use. What's important to note here is that they started out with a lot more. They had 4 finalists, and even before they could release the solution, 1 fell, and it became 3 finalists for post-quantum cryptography because one of them was actually broken by a classical computer. What a lot of folks forget is that as quantum computing progresses, so does classical computing. It was interesting that one of them actually didn't make the final. But these 3 still stand. So they're your best bet moving forward for post-quantum cryptography, what you need to do at your organization. NIST will be releasing, I believe it's something like 13 or 14 more backup solutions, but these 3 are your main and what you should be focusing on. What also came out for the financial industry specifically is the Post-Quantum Financial Infrastructure Framework by the SEC, and you see that up on your screen. That's really good. It came out last October. It was specifically for cryptocurrencies. However, it's about 83 pages, and I gave it a read, wrote an article about that as well that you see up there on the left side, and basically it gives you an idea of how to create a case at your organization to start your post-quantum journey, your quantum resiliency journey, and then also gives you use cases to present of, hey, this is what we would want to do. Now, you're going to need to put in the details of your organization, put in the specifics, but it's a really good document for financial institutions to take a look at. And the other thing that was released last month in January, not last month, in January of 2026 is from Europol. And it's basically how to prioritize post-quantum cryptography migration activities in the financial services industry. It's about 30 some odd pages. And it's really, really good because it helps you prioritize by use case what your organization would need to do in order to move to a post-quantum world. So really, really good information in those 2 pieces. So the SEC PQFIF and then Europol's document. So take a look at those and then see where you can utilize those at your organizations and build your plans according to them. Again, along with NIST FIPS 203, 204, and 205 as well. And just keep in mind that governments and related entities, they're asking organizations to start their quantum journeys. And in the financial industry, I've seen Wells Fargo put out content related to it. I've seen Citi as well. And so what I'd like to see is other financial institutions doing the same to get, to make their clients feel like they are really getting started, because it's really all of our money on the line at this point as a country, as a government, as a society, and we should be worried about that. So I'd love to hear about, what other organizations are doing. But right now, just understand that these may sound like initiatives for quantum safe, but really they'll be requirements very, very soon. If you think about it, You already have controls in NYDFS, FFIEC, all of those, SOC, anything you need to be compliant with about encryption of data at rest, in transit, and while in use. And all it takes for these government agencies to update those is quickly say, well, hey, they need to be quantum ready encryption, right? Or PQC encryption. So keep that in mind, that that's already there, and implementing it or telling you to implement it can happen very quickly. And for all my friends who have worked in CMMC and defense, they understand how quickly that can creep up on you. So in closing, I know that's a lot of information we covered, and there might be some questions as well. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and drop me a note indicating that you saw this presentation and that's why you're connecting with me. And feel free to share your questions with me there. But in the meantime, it was really fantastic speaking with you today, and I really hope you were able to get a lot of great information out of this that you can take back to your organizations and utilize. Thank you very much.